Billionaire opens his disabled sunroom and can't believe what he sees. His name was known in every corner of the business world, his wealth was unimaginable, and his influence reached far beyond the walls of his office. Yet, despite all of his success, there was a silent void in his life, a quiet space that even his money could not fill. That void was his relationship with his son, Ethan. Ethan was 12 years old, a bright and curious boy with a mind that could rival the most talented inventors, but he had been born with a physical disability. Simple movements that most children took for granted were a struggle for him, and he relied on others for daily care. Richard had always wanted the best for Ethan: schools, tutors, therapists, the latest technology. But somewhere along the way, he had let his own work take precedence. He had assumed that providing everything Ethan needed materially was enough. He had assumed that love could be measured in gifts and opportunities. The truth, Richard was slowly beginning to realize, was far more complicated. On that chilly winter morning, Richard sat in his sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city. His desk was spotless, his laptop open with the latest financial reports scrolling across the screen. Yet he felt restless, uneasy. He had just finished a call with Ethan's school. The principal had mentioned Ethan's projects and creativity, but Richard had barely listened. He had nodded politely, distracted by a pressing business deal. But later, as he walked along the quiet halls of his office, the words came back to him. Projects, creativity, imagination. A nagging thought tugged at him. What exactly was Ethan doing in his room all day? What was going on in that space that Richard had not entered for years? He had never needed to go there before, his staff handled everything. And yet that day, a strange mixture of curiosity and unease stirred in him. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was the realization that he didn't really know his own son as well as he thought he did. Richard sighed and pushed back from his desk. He decided he would visit Ethan's room that very afternoon. It was not something he had done in years. He could remember, vaguely, opening the door once when Ethan was very small and watching him play with a pile of blocks on the floor. That memory had felt awkward and foreign, and since then, he had avoided the room entirely. Now, however, the thought of finally seeing it made his heart race with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Driving home in his black luxury sedan, Richard thought about what he might find. Perhaps the room was messy, cluttered with toys and gadgets that went unused. Perhaps it was dull, reflecting a life without inspiration. Or perhaps, he feared, he would find a boy lonely and frustrated, yearning for attention that had rarely come from his father. When he arrived at the house, everything seemed quiet, almost eerily so. The mansion was pristine, the kind of place that seemed to sparkle with wealth yet often felt cold and empty. He made his way to the staircase that led to the second floor and paused at the top, standing in front of the door that led to Ethan's room. For a moment, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the doorknob. "You can do this," he whispered to himself. He opened the door slowly. The first thing he noticed was the quiet, not the silence of neglect, but the silence of concentration. There was no chaos, no disorder, just a room full of life in a subtle, understated way. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the shelves lined with books, small machines, and carefully arranged drawings. Ethan was sitting in the middle of the room, a notebook open on his lap, his pencil moving quickly across the page. He didn't look up immediately, absorbed in his work. Richard watched, his heart tightening. The boy looked so focused, so determined. There was a kind of brilliance in his posture, in the way his fingers, careful and deliberate, maneuvered the pencil. For a long moment, Richard just stood there, taking it all in. He had imagined so many scenarios: mess, disorder, frustration, but what he saw now was the opposite. There was life here, creativity, intelligence, and a spark he hadn't realized was there. Ethan finally looked up, startled at first, and then his face broke into a cautious smile. "Hi, Dad," he said softly. His voice was gentle, but there was a strength in it, too. "Hi, Ethan," Richard replied, his voice slightly shaking. He stepped further into the room, careful not to disturb the boy's work. He couldn't help but notice the way the walls were decorated with intricate drawings of inventions, sketches of robots, and ideas scribbled in a child's energetic handwriting. The entire room seemed to vibrate with imagination and curiosity. Richard walked closer to one of the shelves and picked up a small model of a machine. It was clearly handmade, with careful attention to detail. He turned it in his hands, amazed. He had not expected this level of skill, not from a boy so young. Not from a boy so often overlooked. "Did you make this?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Ethan nodded. "I'm working on something new. I think it could help people like me." Richard's chest tightened. He had always known Ethan was smart, but he had never seen this side of him. A side that was resourceful, imaginative, and full of potential. He realized in that moment that he had underestimated his son for far too long. The boy had not just been passing time in this room. He had been building, learning, dreaming, and creating. For the first time, Richard felt a deep pang of guilt. How many days had he missed? How many milestones, ideas, and moments had passed without his notice? He had been so busy building his empire that he had failed to nurture the most important relationship of his life, the one with his own son. He looked around the room again, noticing details he had never paid attention to before. A small desk by the window held dozens of sketches and notes. A wall was covered in sticky notes, each with ideas for inventions or improvements. Even the chair Ethan sat in was adapted to his needs, showing both his independence and ingenuity. Everything in the room spoke of care, attention, and intelligence. Richard felt a shift inside him. He realized that the room was not just a room, it was a reflection of Ethan himself. A boy who had been living in the shadows of a wealthy father's busy life had found a way to shine, to express himself, and to grow. It was a room of potential, hope, and brilliance. He knelt beside Ethan and said, "I had no idea you've been doing all of this by yourself." Ethan shrugged modestly. "I like making things. It helps me think, helps me imagine what I could do one day." Richard swallowed hard. He felt tears welling up in his eyes, a mixture of pride, regret, and awe. Here was his son, creating a world that he had never bothered to explore until now. And in that moment, Richard knew that everything had to change. He had been absent for too long, but he could start now. He could be a father, not just a provider. He spent the rest of the afternoon in Ethan's room, watching, listening, asking questions, and learning. Every answer Ethan gave revealed a mind that was vibrant, intelligent, and compassionate. Richard began to understand that wealth, influence, and power were meaningless if he could not recognize and nurture the brilliance right in front of him. By the time the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the window, Richard made a silent promise to himself. He would never let another day pass without truly seeing his son. He would not only support Ethan's dreams, but also walk beside him in every step of the journey. The room, once a place he had ignored, had now become a symbol of connection, understanding, and the start of a new chapter for father and son. And for the first time in years, Richard felt a deep, unshakable hope. A hope that his relationship with Ethan could be rebuilt, strengthened, and filled with love, attention, and mutual respect. After that afternoon, Richard couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's room. The images of sketches, models, and carefully built inventions haunted his mind. He had thought he knew his son, but now he realized he had been wrong. The boy was far more capable, imaginative, and determined than Richard had ever imagined. That evening, Richard sat alone in his office, the city lights glowing outside his window. For once, the usual hum of business calls, emails, and financial news felt distant and meaningless. All he could think about was Ethan and the world his son had quietly built. Richard had always considered himself a good provider. He had given Ethan the best care, the best schools, the best tutors, and all the gadgets money could buy. He had assumed that material comfort alone would be enough for a child with special needs. But now he saw that his son's greatest needs were not material. They were emotional, intellectual, and personal. Ethan needed a father who would see him, hear him, and understand his ideas. Richard realized how much he had missed by focusing on wealth instead of connection. The next morning, Richard arrived at the mansion earlier than usual. He wanted to see Ethan again, to learn more about the projects that had filled his son's room. He paused outside the door, almost afraid to enter, but his curiosity was stronger than his hesitation. This time, when he opened the door, he did not just look around, he listened. He wanted to understand Ethan's world, not just see it from the outside. Ethan was sitting at his desk, tinkering with a small mechanical model that looked like a robot. His hands moved carefully, precise but confident. As soon as he noticed his father, Ethan smiled shyly. "Hi, Dad," he said. Richard smiled back a little awkwardly. "Hi, Ethan, can I watch what you're working on?" Ethan nodded eagerly. "Of course. I'm trying to make a helper robot that can pick things up for people who have trouble moving, like me." Richard felt a lump in his throat. Here was his son, using his own experiences and challenges to create something that could help others. He realized that Ethan's mind was not just brilliant, it was compassionate. He had turned his limitations into inspiration. "Can you show me how it works?" Richard asked. Ethan carefully placed the robot on the floor and pressed a small button. The robot's tiny arms moved slowly but accurately, picking up a pencil and placing it on the desk. Richard's eyes widened in surprise. "Ethan, this is amazing," he said. "You made this all by yourself?" Ethan nodded, a little proud. "I've been working on it for months. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I keep trying. I think if I keep improving it, it could help a lot of people." Richard felt a mixture of pride and regret. Pride because his son was truly remarkable. Regret because he had missed so many moments like this, so many opportunities to be involved in Ethan's life. He realized that love was not just about giving gifts or paying for services. It was about presence, attention, and understanding. Over the next few hours, Richard asked questions. Ethan explained every part of the robot, how the joints worked, how the sensors detected objects, and how he had designed it to be easy to control. Richard listened carefully, genuinely interested. He did not interrupt, did not offer suggestions. He just listened. For the first time, he was not the businessman, the billionaire, the powerful figure the world recognized. He was simply a father, watching his child create, learn, and grow. Ethan noticed his father's attention. He had rarely seen Richard so focused on him, so genuinely interested. Usually, Richard's mind was elsewhere, calculating deals, checking emails, or planning the next big project. But now he was here in the room, fully present. Ethan felt a sense of warmth and happiness he hadn't felt in years. He realized that maybe, finally, his father truly saw him. As the day went on, Richard explored more of the room. He found a notebook filled with sketches of other inventions, devices that could make life easier for people with disabilities, designs for creative tools, and ideas for small machines that could solve everyday problems. Every page reflected Ethan's intelligence, empathy, and determination. Richard could not believe that his son had been creating all of this in secret without anyone noticing. "Ethan," Richard said softly, "why didn't you show me any of this before?" Ethan shrugged. "I thought you were busy. I didn't want to bother you." Richard's heart ached. He had been so busy, so focused on his work that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He realized that he had not just been absent physically, he had been absent emotionally. He had assumed that love could be measured in money and comfort, but now he knew that love also meant attention, guidance, and presence. Determined to make a change, Richard decided that he would spend more time with Ethan. Not just in the room, not just watching him work, but actively supporting him, encouraging him, and learning from him. He wanted to be the father Ethan deserved, someone who could share his successes, struggles, and dreams. Over the next few weeks, Richard made it a habit to visit Ethan's room every day. They worked on projects together, talked about ideas, and explored new inventions. Richard began to understand that Ethan's creativity was limitless, and that his disability did not define him. It only shaped the unique way he saw the world. Ethan's mind was a brilliant combination of logic, imagination, and empathy. Richard felt privileged to witness it firsthand. As they spent more time together, their relationship began to transform. Ethan became more confident, knowing that his father truly cared and was interested in his thoughts and ideas. Richard, in turn, learned to appreciate the world from Ethan's perspective. He realized that wealth and power were nothing compared to the joy of connection, understanding, and shared experiences. One day, while they were working on a new invention, Ethan said, "Dad, I think one day I can make something that will help a lot of people with disabilities. I just need time and support." Richard smiled, feeling tears welling up in his eyes. "Ethan, you have all the support you need, and I promise I'll be here for you every step of the way." That moment marked a turning point. The room, once a place of mystery and distance, had become a bridge between father and son. It was no longer just a space for Ethan to work alone. It was a space where they could share, learn, and grow together. Richard realized that his life had been transformed, not by wealth or power, but by simply opening the door to Ethan's world. He had discovered the depth of his son's mind, the strength of his spirit, and the brilliance of his imagination. And in doing so, he had rediscovered the true meaning of fatherhood. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Richard continued to spend time in Ethan's room, sometimes working together on inventions, other times simply talking about school, dreams, and life. He noticed how much happier and confident Ethan had become, and he felt a sense of pride unlike anything he had experienced in the business world. Through this process, Richard also began to reflect on his own life. He realized that he had been chasing achievements, deals, and recognition while neglecting the most important relationship he had. Seeing Ethan's creativity and determination reminded him of the value of empathy, patience, and understanding. It reminded him that success was not just about money. It was about love, connection, and nurturing the potential of those we care about. By the end of that period, Richard and Ethan had formed a bond that was deeper and stronger than ever before. The father who had once felt distant, detached, and unsure had become a mentor, supporter, and friend to his son. And the boy who had once worked quietly in his room, hoping for recognition, now felt seen, valued, and loved. Richard understood that the journey was just beginning. There were challenges ahead, and Ethan would face obstacles as he grew and pursued his dreams. But Richard was committed to being there, not just as a father, but as a partner, supporter, and guide. He knew that together they could accomplish incredible things. And as Richard left the room that evening, watching the sun set over the city, he felt a sense of peace and hope. He had opened the door to Ethan's world, and in doing so, he had opened the door to a new chapter in both of their lives, a chapter filled with love, creativity, and shared dreams. The room, once a quiet, mysterious place, had become a symbol of growth, understanding, and the limitless potential of a young mind. And for Richard, it had become a reminder that the greatest treasures in life were not found in wealth or power, but in the connections we nurture, the love we give, and the people we choose to see. Weeks passed, and Richard's life slowly began to change. The once busy billionaire, who had been consumed by deals, meetings, and the relentless pursuit of success, now found himself looking forward to afternoons spent in Ethan's room. Every visit revealed something new, another invention, another sketch, another idea that reflected Ethan's remarkable mind. Richard had started to understand that Ethan's creativity was not limited by his disability. Instead, it was amplified by it. Every challenge Ethan faced became an opportunity for innovation. Every difficulty inspired a solution, and Richard could not help but marvel at the boy's resilience and determination. One afternoon, Richard arrived at the mansion to find Ethan seated at his desk, working on a new project. The boy's hands moved skillfully over a small, intricate device that looked like a miniature wheelchair with robotic arms. It was clear that Ethan had been designing it for a purpose, something practical, thoughtful, and potentially life-changing. "Dad," Ethan said without looking up, "I think this could help people move objects more easily. I've been thinking about how hard it is for people like me to do everyday tasks." Richard knelt beside him, examining the device carefully. "Ethan, this is incredible. You've thought about every detail. How did you come up with this idea?" Ethan paused for a moment, then looked at his father with earnest eyes. "I noticed how hard it is to reach things, even simple things like a cup or a book. I wanted to make something that could help me and maybe help others too. I want to do something meaningful." Richard felt a surge of pride and awe. His son was not only brilliant, he was compassionate. He had turned his personal challenges into inspiration for creating tools that could improve the lives of others. Richard realized that this boy, his own son, was capable of changing the world. Over the next hour, Richard listened as Ethan explained every detail of the design, the reasoning behind each part, and the way it would function in real life. Richard asked questions not to criticize or correct, but to understand. He wanted to learn from Ethan, to see the world through his eyes. As they worked together, Richard noticed how much Ethan had grown in confidence. There was a spark in his eyes, a sense of pride and ownership over his creations. And Richard realized that his presence mattered more than anything he could buy for his son. The simple act of listening, observing, and supporting had given Ethan something far more valuable than wealth: validation, encouragement, and love. One day, as they were reviewing sketches for a new invention, Ethan asked, "Dad, do you think people like me can really make a difference?" Richard looked at him carefully, his heart swelling. "Ethan, you've already made a difference. You've inspired me, and I'm sure anyone who sees your work will feel the same. You just have to keep believing in yourself, keep working hard, and never stop dreaming." Ethan smiled, his face lighting up with excitement. I want to make more things, Dad. I want to help as many people as I can. Richard reached out and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. And I'll be right here with you every step of the way. We'll do this together. The following days were filled with experimentation. Richard and Ethan spent hours testing different designs, solving problems, and making improvements. Sometimes the machines worked perfectly on the first try. Other times they failed, requiring patience, persistence, and countless adjustments. But each failure became a lesson, and each success a victory. Richard noticed a change in himself, too. He no longer felt the constant pressure to achieve more, earn more, or control everything. Being with Ethan reminded him of what truly mattered: connection, empathy, and shared experiences. He began to see that true success was not measured in wealth or power, but in the ability to support, guide, and nurture others. One evening, Richard found Ethan sitting quietly, staring at one of his notebooks. The boy looked thoughtful, almost worried. "What's on your mind, Ethan?" Richard asked gently. Ethan looked up, hesitating. I want to show my inventions to more people, but I'm scared." "What if they don't like them? What if they think I'm not good enough?" Richard's heart tightened. He remembered all the times he had doubted himself, all the moments of fear and hesitation. He knew that Ethan's concerns were natural, but he also knew that his son had the talent, the determination, and the heart to overcome them. "Ethan," he said softly, "people will always have opinions. Some will like what you do, some may not understand it. But what matters is that you believe in yourself and keep trying. You have something special, and the world deserves to see it." Ethan nodded slowly, taking in his father's words. "You really think so, Dad?" "I know so," Richard replied, "and I'll help you every step of the way. You're not alone in this." Over the next few weeks, they began preparing for a small exhibition at Ethan's school. The goal was simple: to show his inventions to classmates, teachers, and a few invited guests. Richard helped Ethan refine the presentation, practice explaining his ideas, and organize the devices for display. The day of the exhibition arrived, and Ethan was nervous. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his robot and other inventions. Richard stayed by his side, offering quiet encouragement. "You've worked so hard, Ethan. Just show them what you've done. Be proud of yourself." When the doors opened, Ethan's classmates and teachers approached, curious and impressed. They asked questions, tested the devices, and marveled at the thought and effort behind each invention. Richard watched as his son's confidence grew with every interaction. Ethan explained the functionality, the purpose, and the inspiration behind each creation with clarity and passion. Richard felt a deep sense of pride. This was the boy he had underestimated, the boy he had ignored, standing tall and confident in front of an audience, sharing his talents and dreams. Richard realized that his presence, support, and encouragement had made a tangible difference in Ethan's life. After the exhibition, a teacher approached Richard. "Your son is remarkable," she said. "His creativity, intelligence, and empathy are beyond his years. With guidance and support, he could achieve anything." Richard smiled, his eyes moist with emotion. "Yes," he said quietly. "He already has. He's taught me more than I could ever teach him." That evening, back in Ethan's room, father and son reflected on the day. Ethan was tired but happy, his eyes shining with excitement. "Dad, people really liked my inventions. Some even asked if I could help them with their projects." Richard nodded, pride and admiration filling his chest. "I told you, Ethan, you have something special, and this is just the beginning." Ethan smiled, leaning against his father. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad." "You didn't need me," Richard said softly. "You did all the work. I just helped you see how amazing you already were." As they sat together, Richard realized something profound. He had opened the door to Ethan's room, expecting to find a child lost in his own world. Instead, he had found a young genius, full of creativity, compassion, and determination. And in the process, he had discovered the true meaning of fatherhood: not just providing, not just protecting, but seeing, supporting, and nurturing. From that day forward, Richard committed himself to being fully present in Ethan's life. He understood that challenges would arise, that failures would happen, and that life would sometimes be difficult. But he also knew that together, they could face anything. Ethan's room, once a quiet space of solitude, had become a place of connection, growth, and endless possibilities. Richard began to see the world differently, too. He realized that the best ideas, the most meaningful achievements, and the greatest happiness often came from love, support, and collaboration. Wealth and power could open doors, but it was presence, attention, and care that truly made a difference. As the days turned into months, Ethan's confidence and abilities continued to grow. He explored new projects, experimented with new inventions, and even began mentoring other students with disabilities. Richard watched with pride as his son not only excelled but inspired others to do the same. And through it all, Richard remained by his side, not as a distant figure of authority, not as a provider of material wealth, but as a father, mentor, and friend. He understood that the true value of life was not in what he could buy or achieve alone, but in the relationships he nurtured, the love he gave, and the support he offered. Ethan's room had changed more than just a space. It had changed lives. It had transformed a distant father into a present, caring parent. It had transformed a boy's self-doubt into confidence and determination. And it had become a symbol of hope, creativity, and the limitless potential that lies within every child when they are seen, supported, and loved. Richard knew that their journey was far from over. Challenges would come and obstacles would appear. But he also knew that as long as he remained by Ethan's side, supporting, guiding, and believing in him, there was no limit to what they could achieve together. And as Richard left the room that evening, watching Ethan carefully arrange his latest invention on the desk, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and wonder. He had opened a door expecting curiosity, but he had found inspiration. He had opened a door expecting to see a child, but he had found a world of dreams, brilliance, and possibility. And in that room, filled with light, ideas, and hope, Richard knew that he had found something far more valuable than wealth or success. He had found connection, purpose, and the boundless power of a father and son united. Months had passed since Richard had first stepped into Ethan's room and discovered the remarkable world his son had quietly built. Since that day, their relationship had grown stronger, deeper, and more meaningful than either of them could have imagined. The room, once a private sanctuary of solitude for Ethan, had become a shared space of learning, creativity, and connection. And as the father and son worked together on countless projects, Richard realized that his life had been transformed in ways far greater than any business deal or financial achievement could ever provide. One morning, Richard received a letter from a local science and innovation fair. They had heard about Ethan's inventions and invited him to present his work on a larger platform. Excitement and nervousness filled Ethan's heart. He had never imagined that his creations could reach beyond the walls of his room, beyond the circle of classmates and teachers who had already admired his work. "Dad, do you think I'm ready for this?" Ethan asked hesitantly, holding the invitation in his small hands. Richard smiled warmly. "Ethan, you've been ready for a long time. You've worked hard, learned so much, and grown in ways most people could only dream of. This is your moment to show the world what you're capable of." Ethan's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. "Really? Yes," Richard said, "and I'll be right there with you." The weeks leading up to the fair were busy but joyful. Father and son spent hours perfecting Ethan's inventions, practicing how to explain each one clearly, and anticipating questions from judges and visitors. Richard noticed how much Ethan's confidence had grown. He no longer hesitated when presenting ideas, no longer doubted his abilities, and no longer feared judgment. Each success in the room had prepared him for this moment. On the day of the fair, Ethan's excitement was palpable. He carefully set up his display, arranging his inventions neatly and placing explanatory notes for each device. Richard stayed by his side, offering encouragement and quiet support. Together, they created an environment that was professional, inviting, and full of the wonder and creativity that had defined Ethan's room for so long. As the doors opened, a steady stream of people came to see Ethan's inventions. Judges, students, teachers, and even visitors from other cities approached, curious and eager to learn. Ethan explained each device with clarity, passion, and confidence. He demonstrated how the helper robot could pick up objects, how his new mechanical tools could assist people with mobility challenges, and how his ideas could inspire innovation for accessibility. Richard watched in awe as his son captured the attention of the audience. People were impressed, asking thoughtful questions and offering encouragement. Ethan answered each one patiently, his confidence and enthusiasm shining through. Richard realized that the boy who had once worked quietly in his room, uncertain and shy, had now grown into someone capable of inspiring others. A group of judges approached, clearly impressed by Ethan's work. "Your inventions are incredible," one said. "We are especially amazed at how practical and thoughtful they are. Have you considered taking these ideas further?" Ethan nodded, smiling. "Yes, I want to continue improving them. I want to help as many people as I can." Richard felt a surge of pride and emotion. His son's passion, intelligence, and compassion were evident to everyone who met him. And in that moment, Richard understood that Ethan's room had not only nurtured his creativity, it had prepared him for a life of impact, service, and innovation. After the fair, as they walked back to the car, Ethan spoke softly. "Dad, I think this is just the beginning. I want to keep creating, keep learning, and keep helping people." Richard smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And I'll be with you every step of the way, Ethan. This is just the start of a journey, and together we can do incredible things." In the days that followed, Richard and Ethan began planning new projects. They talked about ways to develop prototypes, approach organizations for support, and even mentor other children with disabilities who were interested in science and technology. Ethan's vision was expanding beyond the walls of his room, and Richard was there to help guide, support, and encourage him. As they worked, Richard reflected on the journey they had taken together. He remembered the first day he had opened the door to Ethan's room, expecting to find a lonely child or a cluttered space. Instead, he had found a world filled with creativity, determination, and brilliance. And as he watched his son grow, he realized that the greatest lessons had been his own, about patience, understanding, empathy, and the power of presence. One afternoon, Richard sat quietly in Ethan's room while his son tinkered with a new invention. He watched as Ethan adjusted a small mechanical arm, tested its movement, and made careful notes. Every action reflected focus, intelligence, and creativity, and Richard understood more deeply than ever that the boy before him was capable of extraordinary things. "Dad," Ethan said suddenly, looking up, "do you think people will take my inventions seriously?" Richard smiled. "Ethan, people already do, and the more you continue to create, the more they will, but even if someone doubts you, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you believe in yourself and never stop trying." Ethan nodded, inspired by his father's words. "I won't stop, Dad, I promise." Richard felt a swell of emotion. He had come a long way from the distant, busy father he had been. Now he was fully present in his son's life, supporting him, guiding him, and learning from him. He realized that this was what true fatherhood meant, being there not just physically but emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Over time, Ethan's inventions began to gain wider recognition. Local organizations, schools, and even small technology firms took interest in his work. He was invited to speak at events, mentor younger children, and collaborate with engineers who were inspired by his ideas. And through it all, Richard remained by his side, proud, supportive, and deeply moved by the boy's journey. The bond between father and son grew stronger with each passing day. They shared laughter, challenges, successes, and failures. Richard learned to see the world through Ethan's eyes, understanding the creativity, resilience, and determination that defined him. And Ethan, in turn, felt the security, guidance, and encouragement that a loving father could provide. One evening, as they sat together in the warm glow of the room's desk lamp, Ethan said, "Dad, thank you for believing in me. I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Richard smiled, his eyes glistening with tears. "No, Ethan, I didn't do it for you. You've done everything yourself. I just helped you see how amazing you already were, and I promise I'll always be here to help you reach even higher." In that moment, Richard realized that his life had been forever changed. Opening the door to Ethan's room had not just transformed their relationship, it had transformed him as a person. He had learned lessons about love, patience, and understanding that no amount of wealth or power could ever teach. He had discovered the true meaning of success, nurturing potential, supporting dreams, and being fully present for the people who mattered most. As the years went on, Ethan continued to innovate, inspire, and make a difference. His inventions became more advanced, his confidence grew, and his compassion for others remained at the heart of everything he did. And Richard remained by his side, not as a distant figure of authority, but as a mentor, guide, and loving father. Ethan's room, once a quiet sanctuary for a boy who worked in solitude, had become a symbol of connection, growth, and endless possibilities. It was a place where imagination thrived, challenges were overcome, and dreams took flight. And for Richard, it had become a reminder that the greatest treasures in life are not found in wealth, status, or possessions, but in the relationships we nurture, the love we give, and the lives we touch. One quiet evening, as they both sat in the room reflecting on their journey, Ethan looked around at his sketches, his inventions, and the space that had been the heart of so much growth. "Dad," he said softly, "I think this room will always remind me of everything I can do and everything we've done together." Richard nodded, smiling. "Yes, Ethan, it's a reminder that no matter where life takes us, we can always create, imagine, and support each other. And I'm proud of you more than words can ever say." Ethan leaned against his father, feeling safe, inspired, and loved. In that room, they had built more than inventions. They had built a bond that would last a lifetime. And in that bond, Richard realized, lay the true meaning of life: love, connection, and the limitless power of seeing and believing in each other. As the night settled over the mansion, father and son sat together, surrounded by the evidence of creativity, perseverance, and hope. Richard understood that this was only the beginning of Ethan's journey, but he also knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And in that quiet, light-filled room, filled with the hum of imagination and the warmth of love, Richard and Ethan had found something far greater than wealth or recognition. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had discovered the true power of family, support, and dreams realized.